Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and I'm so excited to be covering yet another 2022 NBA mock draft on the channel. And again, as per standard, a full first round edition where we cover all 30 selections, what I expect could happen in the first round. Again, this is not a big board. This is a mock draft. The two of them are very different. I do have my latest released big board up on the channel. I'm hoping to get another one out within the next week or so. And then one final one in front of the NBA draft. But again, I'm so very excited for the NBA draft. It is coming up around the corner faster than you could expect, which is why I'm going to ask you guys to hit that subscribe button right now. We will have NBA draft night coverage here on the channel. And I'll be giving, of course, my winners, losers, grades, thoughts, analysis, everything you guys want to know and more. So make sure you are subscribed to Utility Sports and smash that like button for today's video if you have been enjoying all the content. We do have some other great videos up on the channel that I recommend checking out as well. And then when we look here at this first slide I have, it's a huge thank you. I just want to thank you all so very much. I don't tend to do this maybe as often as I should because right now at the point we're at on YouTube, I would have never thought we'd get here. So it's been a dream come true. I really want to thank you all each so much for being subscribed to the channel. It has been a real blessing. So again, thank you so much. And then go follow our socials as well. We do have the links in the bio. For those, I highly recommend specifically our Twitter. If you are active on Twitter, make sure to give us a follow on there because we do tweet quite a bit. I tweet during games quite often and also just my generic thoughts every once in a while. It's not going to be too overwhelming, not too many tweets, but to a healthy point where you can stay up to date with us a little bit more, but not an overwhelming amount. So now with that all said, let's get into the actual video here. And first overall, we got the Orlando Magic, the team that lucked into the number one pick, and they are in a really great spot with it now. I want to commend them. First of all, the Nikola Vucevic trade was a phenomenal move. So Magic fans, you've got a lot to be excited for because not only was Wendell Carter a really nice steal there, that also resulted in Franz Wagner for you. You have 2 first-round picks in the next draft, and of course, number 1 here in this draft. And with this pick, we're going Chet Holmgren, which I know this is highly divided. There's a lot of people that are saying, well, he didn't take Jabari Smith 1. I'm clicking off. Chet Holmgren, former high school teammate of Jalen Suggs, and he's a really special player. I know people are afraid of his frame. I'm going to tell you right now, next to Wendell Carter, he plays the 4. He's going to be one of the better 4-man in the league on day 1. He is so supremely talented. It's not a surprise that a lot of the draft experts like him first overall. It's not a surprise that I think he'll go first overall. I mean, ultimately here with Holmgren, the overall talent at his size as a 7-footer, it is really tough to duplicate a player like that in today's league. A lot of people really do like Jabari Smith, and I think Jabari Smith's an awesome young player as well. But I think Orlando here opts for Chet Holmgren. That's at least my latest intuition on it. Sure, I'm thinking about Jabari Smith still. I'm not saying this is a flat-out end goal 100% lock, but I think it's more certain than not that Chet Holmgren goes first overall. I feel pretty good about that. The Orlando Magic social media team actually tweeted out saying that they have a type when talking about skinny, lengthy, lanky type players. And I mean, obviously it's the social media team. They don't know everything. They don't know all the ins and outs on who they're going to draft, but it is a little bit of a small tease and hint. Now, the one thing here is Jabari Smith is kind of slim and lanky as well. So maybe they could be reading into that a little bit too much, and maybe they're opting for the other guy. But here for me, I think Chet Holmgren is going to be the number 1 pick, at least at this point of the process, which then at number 2, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that, again, if you're trusting the process there in Oklahoma City and stealing a little bit of that MO from the 76ers, you have to be pretty happy you landed 2nd overall in a really great class where you get to draft Jabari Smith Jr. 2nd now. And I do really like this kid a lot coming out of Auburn. He looked really good in that blue and orange there for the Auburn Tigers, and he's going to stay in that same colorway here for the Thunder, and I think it's a really phenomenal selection. No surprise that the player who's gotten the most comparisons to Kevin Durant in this class now goes to Oklahoma City 2nd overall. I just think it's a really great pairing. Now, for me, I don't think Jabari Smith Jr. is going to be a 2nd Kevin Durant. I think that comparison's a little misleading. He's not as polished of a player as everyone is assuming he is. There's a lot of upside here, a ton. I mean, he could be a star, a true star in this league. But at the same time, right now, he needs to get better at putting the ball in the deck. I think defensively, He's got a lot of upside and promise because of his length and his grit and his ability to time shots around the rim. And he's also got really good lateral movement, but I think he's got to, sharpen up some of his understanding of defensive positioning. And I also think when you look at Jabari Smith here, the biggest thing for him is he's a tough shot maker. He's going to knock down contested jump shots consistently. He's probably the best shooter in this class, and that's what sells you taking him second overall. If you're Oklahoma City, you pair him with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey, and you're going to have a lot of fun there in Oklahoma City. Thunder fans, you should be excited about this one. Then on to 3, the Houston Rockets. And again, this is something I'm starting to feel very certain about. I think the top 3 is starting to solidify itself in terms of the actual draft order, who gets drafted in the top 3. I think the top 3 are locks now. It could be in any order, but ultimately I feel very confident about the order that I have them going in this mock draft. And it's the 3 forwards. Banchero probably goes 3rd here, which is pretty interesting because I think a lot of people are sold that his potential is maybe the lowest between a Chet Holmgren and a Jabari Smith and himself. And it's kind of difficult to look at it that way because Paolo Banchero is such a good half-court scorer. He's also a decent playmaker. I think sometimes he stops the ball a little bit too much, but he's pretty good at passing the basketball in transition. And when he is willing to pass the basketball, he does a very good job of it. But ultimately here for me, Paolo Banchero, you look at it from Houston's perspective, drafting a so-so defender, 3rd overall when you gave up 119 points a game this past year, which was the most in the NBA by a decent margin. You will have to wonder about your defense, but this is more than a 1-year rebuild for Houston. They're going to be okay with losing a ton of games next year and then trying to build up the rest of this roster. Don't forget, last year they also drafted Usman Garuba, who we really didn't see very much of this past year in the NBA. He's a defense-first type of guy. Jayshawn Tate, I think, can be a defense-first mentality type of guy. He's not a super skilled defender, but he puts effort in on that end of the floor, and I think he's a solid defender. And then if you complement them with some other defenders around the floor and maybe another backup guard that can really get some stops, that could be where you see Houston start to take a step forward. But the duo specifically of Green and Banchero, I think, is too intriguing for Rafael Stone to pass up 3rd overall. Moving into 4, Sacramento Kings here now. And Sacktown, definitely a team that needed to move up in the top 4, and they did in this lottery. It was huge for them moving up to a spot where now they can maybe grab a player who is a great complement to Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. And that's exactly what I've looked for here with this selection. We're going to go with the ultimate filler player in this draft, and that is Keegan Murray out of Iowa. He does pretty much everything right that you would like for him to do. And he's a player who I think is going to stay very high on the boards of a lot of GMs. And he kind of fits that prototypical 4th overall pick that we've seen in recent years. Think about guys like DeAndre Hunter. Think about a guy like Patrick Williams. They all kind of have similar frames, a little bit of a similar skill set to a guy like Keegan Murray, who I see now going 4th overall to Sacramento based on the idea of fit, because he's a very solid positional defender. He's someone who off the ball offensively is willing to work. He's going to cut. He's going to hit the offensive glass. He'll knock down open corner threes. I think his above the break 3, at the NBA level is something that we'll have to monitor a little bit early in his career. And depending on how he's shooting with consistency, that could vary a little bit. But ultimately, he's a very good player. This gives Sacramento some options on what they want to do with Harrison Barnes. Murray could come off the bench pretty early, but ultimately here the idea is that Sacramento does not go into the season starting Chimezie Metu, and in turn looks to really try and win with a huge upgrade with Keegan Murray into their rotation. And again, I think this is a very good outcome for Sacramento. Monty McNair, I think he knows how to draft really well. The Halliburton trade did shock me a little bit, but now at this spot, the goal is to make the postseason. Keegan Murray gets you closer there. Pick 5, Detroit now on the clock, and this gives them 2 interesting options. Of course, the 2 guys I'm talking about here, Shaedon Sharpe, who was a high schooler, has not played a game for Kentucky, but is eligible in this year's draft. And then Jaden Ivey as well, who, as anyone who's been watching the channel knows, I think he's the best player in this class. I think he's going to be one of the most dynamic players in the NBA because of his ability to go fast to slow, slow to fast. I think he's got really great footwork when attacking downhill, and I think he's an improving playmaker. And I actually had a little bit of a discussion with one of our viewers on the channel about Jaden Ivey and his fit here in Detroit, and that's ultimately who I did mock here to Detroit. And the reason why I think the 2 of them are actually a pretty good fit in terms of Cade and Jaden Ivey because for me, Jaden Ivey, yes, both players are probably better with the ball in their hands. That's not a bad thing in today's league. It's not a surprise that when Chris Paul went to the Houston Rockets, everyone was worried, oh, there's only one basketball. Who's going to dribble the rock? That team led the league in wins and almost beat the Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant. Now, I'm not saying Ivy and Cade are going to be that dynamic of a duo, but they're going to be really, really darn good in the Eastern Conference. Jaden Ivey, he's got, again, that slow to fast burst, which I think is huge, and something that Cade Cunningham maybe doesn't have as much, but Cunningham's got all the cerebral components that Jaden Ivey is lacking, specifically as an overall floor general and playmaker, and as a shot creator. And I think the two of them are going to be really tough to cover when it comes to actual NBA playoff series and just throughout the regular season, because you think about the matchups. And I think one thing to look at here, Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic for the Dallas Mavericks. Both of them are more slow-paced style players, really great footwork, positioning, IQ. And I think, yes, it did have a lot of success this year, but at points against Golden State, you could tell that they started to time them up over the course of a series and really had a good understanding of the idea that, hey, this team's not going to blow us away with their athleticism. If we play really solid, grounded help defense, rotate well, we can handle these guys, which is completely the opposite of what Phoenix wanted to do, where they wanted to play one-on-one with them. And I think that's a disaster. For Detroit here, you get Jaden Ivey, and then the idea is you have to deal with Cade Cunningham, his patience, his size, his ability to use his footwork and get around people. Oh, by the way, he can see over the defense and make all the right plays and the right reads, and he can knock down a step back jump shot. And then you add Jaden Ivey, and think about the counter matchups throughout the game. A guy might go from guarding Cade Cunningham to having the matchup with Jaden Ivey. And now instead of having a slow burst type of guy who's going to knock down shots over you, you have one of the fastest players in the NBA. So you have to be able to change your defensive timing so much when guarding between these two players. I do think Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham would be a really good pairing. I think both of them can work off the ball. I think both of them can work on the ball. And ultimately, as long as the two players are committed to trying to make it work, they're going to have a ton of success. Pick 6, the Indiana Pacers here now. And for me with Indiana, knowing Rick Carlisle and knowing this Pacers team, it's an interesting spot because the Tyrese Halliburton trade has swung this franchise. They now have their pick and roll ball handler, which is perfect for Carlisle's offense. And they have their pick and roll screen guy in Miles Turner. So now it's about trying to fill out all the rest of the pieces of the puzzle here for Indiana. And this is a great opportunity for a team that has not picked in the top 9 since 1989. They need a guy who can become the guy. And I think this is a perfect fit actually off of Tyrese Halliburton, a player who still needs to grow offensively, but it's Shaedon Sharpe here, and a player who in his high school time showcased his athleticism, his ability to get to the rim very frequently. But I don't think what he showcased was his ability to maybe knock down tough shots, moving, and his ability to really live in the mid-range area and maybe even behind the arc to a certain degree. He showed those things, but not to the level that I think he's capable of. And once you put him in the NBA with more spacing, I think spacing is really the key component here for Shaedon Sharpe. Watching him in high school, the high school floors are way smaller. And again, he was playing some of the top players in the nation at the high school level. So the athleticism was still very high. The talent level was still very high. So it's somewhat tough as a slasher and space creating scorer in the mid-range to showcase all your talents because of the size of the floor. You get him into the NBA, I think he's going to blossom and blossom quickly, even faster than most people are expecting, because yes, even though he is very young, I think he does have a very nice NBA ready game. He's very athletic, and I think the athleticism itself is going to make him a tough cover. And I think he's the perfect guy to put next to Tyrese Halliburton, because again, you kind of have that slow, fast combination where you have a guy who can play more cerebral with the basketball, and then a guy who's an absolute flamethrower. He's going to be able to tear the rim off the backboard type of player in Shaedon Sharpe. I really do like this for Indiana, and I think he might become a franchise-changing type of player there for the Pacers. Pick 7, Portland, the Trailblazers now on the clock. And of course, Mike Schmitz from ESPN did get hired as an assistant GM there. So there's been a lot of questions. How much impact will he have on this year's draft, if any? And I think that it's going to be a very small amount. And people are saying that, you know, there's rumors that he's not going to work for the Blazers until after the draft, which there is truth to that. But let's not act like Joe Cronin, the GM for Portland, and Mike Schmitz are not talking on the phone, having some conversations in person. even if he's technically not working for Portland, Portland knew what they were doing here 3 weeks ahead of the NBA draft, hiring the lead draft expert from ESPN. That is not a coincidence, okay? Portland is planning on using this selection, and they want to get a player who can help them a lot here. And knowing Mike Schmitz, what he's going to push forward here for Portland is a player who has improved a ton, and a player who has pretty good athleticism. And for me, I think that's Benedict Mathurin here based on what was left on the board. It does make a ton of sense here that Mike Schmitz would like to add a player like this looking at Portland. And Joe Cronin as well. I mean, this is, again, an overall fit as well, not simply because of the Mike Schmitz hire. I think Portland is a team that when you look at them over the last 10 years, the failure to find top-end wing play was always the biggest concern. Think about the years where Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless were their two best wings, or when Alan Crabb was on the max contract. They've had issues really finding the 2, 3, 4 position, specifically when CJ McCollum was not in the game as the 2. And realistically, CJ McCollum's more of a lead guard type anyway. When you actually look at the real wing play here, they were always lacking. Benedict Mathurin fills that hole immediately. And when you look at building this team around Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons, you also have Josh Hart, who's probably going to stick around. You fit Benedict Mathurin in there kind of as a 2-3 hybrid, and he brings you a lot of the athleticism that I think currently Portland is lacking. And he also brings you solid defensive upside here as a player who, as a sophomore out of Arizona, I think he's ready to transition to the NBA a little bit more so than some of the other players in this class. And I also think he's very ready to actually have a little bit of a scoring impact pretty quickly on. I think he could average 12 to 15 points a game his rookie season, and that is a pretty sizable contribution, probably closer to that 12 mark than the 15 mark, but ultimately they're 12 points a game for Portland, adding that in next to Dame and Simons, Nurkic if they keep him around, and Josh Hart, not to mention Nasir Little. You're able to really start to fill out this roster and feel a little bit better about the direction of this franchise, and I think Mathurin a really good hit. Pick 8, the Pelicans here now, and a team that probably would have liked to grab Mathurin themselves, find themselves in an interesting spot. Last week I mocked Jalen Duren. I have decided to switch it up a little bit this week. I feel like they could go either way here between those two players, Duren and the player I mock here in Dyson Daniels. So we're looking at the Duren or Daniels combo here. And for me, the reason I opted Daniels in this mock draft is, again, I think next to the players that they already have on their roster in Jose Alvarado, CJ McCollum, I think you're lacking a bigger guard here. Now, Herb Jones, we know how special he is. Trey Murphy, I think he's going to take a step forward in year 2. He was a really nice pickup out of Virginia last year in the draft. I really did believe in that selection. And the idea here for New Orleans is maybe this leads into Willie Green having way more flexibility come playoff time, where you have some lineups where you don't have to run a center because you have enough size and length at your other positions. Dyson Daniels, a bigger guard. You can run Herb Jones as a small ball 5. Trey Murphy is the 4 maybe. You have Zion Williamson on the floor probably next year, hopefully. Brandon Ingram. And you have CJ McCollum. So you have enough combination of scoring and on-ball play. Now you need a little bit more playmaking size defense, and that's why Dyson Daniels does fit the bill here for the Pelicans. Number 9, San Antonio here now. And the Spurs, they're not going to miss an opportunity as great as this one, which is grabbing Jalen Duren at this spot, 9th overall. This is a huge steal for me. I really do think that this is a massive steal. He's top 5 on my big board currently as we speak. And I thought about him 7 for Portland. I thought about him 8 for New Orleans. And I think ultimately if San Antonio gets him at 9, again, it's a really big time steal. Yes, they have Jakob Poeltl right now. We're looking long-term here. Jalen Duren, I think, is going to become one of the more switchable bigs in the NBA. He showcased that this past year in Memphis quite a bit. His ability to cover out in space, recover to the rim, and block a shot off the glass was nearly unmatched in this class if it weren't for Chet Holmgren. And then you also look at his ability offensively. I know a lot of people love to say he's not skilled. Being a good screener and lob catcher does take skill. I know people don't really believe that, but if it was super easy, every single big man would do it and be good at it. And it simply just isn't the case. I think Jalen Duren is a freak athlete, someone who's going to be able to put up 15 points a night at certain points in his career, and maybe even 15 rebounds a game. He's that tenacious of a rebounder, and I think he's going to have a really good long-term impact there in San Antonio, whether they look to trade Jakob Poeltl or not. Jalen Duren, I think, is a dream outcome still for the Spurs. Moving on to 10, Washington Wizards here now. And last week I mocked him Dyson Daniels. This week he's not on the board any longer. So again, I'm going to look for a guard here. AJ Griffin's still out here, but just with the combination of Kuzma and Avdia and Kispert and all the other wings that they have there, Rui Hachimura as well, I just don't really think that they can look for a forward along with Kristaps Porzingis. So for me, I am going to force a guard here, go with Johnny Davis, who I think is worthy of a top 10 selection, or at least nearly a top 10 selection. And for me, with Washington, he probably would come off the bench his rookie season. And I think that's a pretty good role for him to kind of work his way into the NBA. Specifically, when you look at his skill set, he's sort of a Jordan Clarkson type player, but he's a much better defender than Jordan Clarkson. I think he is a starting level player in the NBA at some point. But rookie season, come off the bench behind Bradley Beal. The issue here in Washington is you have a lot of mouths to feed, whether that's Kuzma or Hachimura. Kristaps wants his touches. Beal's going to need his touches, obviously, if this team's going to be good. You do have a lot of players who are going to look to score the basketball. So that's why Dyson Daniels would have been the dream fit here. But with him off the board, you have to try and find more guard play. I still think guard is a massive need for Washington here. Maybe this is a trade down spot where they feel like they can move back and find a different point guard a little bit later on in the draft. But ultimately, Johnny Davis, if they stay at 10, I think is a good enough talent that he warrants a selection here at this spot. Number 11, the New York Knicks now on the board. And for me, with the Knicks, there's a few different things to consider, specifically because Mitchell Robinson's headed toward free agency. Could we see the Knicks take a big man? Could we look at the Knicks taking a point guard? Because they've been searching and dying for their franchise point guard for some time. A little bit of a disclaimer here. You're probably not finding your franchise point guard at pick 11. So let's go in the middle here. Let's go find a wing and a player who I think is very NBA ready as an off-ball player in the NBA. And I know some people might be hearing that and saying, wait, what do you mean very ready to be an off-ball player in the NBA? What does that mean specifically? Being an off-ball player does take skill, and it does take certain traits that translate well to the NBA. And I think, honestly, AJ Griffin's one of the more ready off-ball offensive players in this class because of his ability to knock down the three-point shot, but it's more than that. It's not just reading the three-point percentage. When you watch this player, he's very adept at using certain moves and certain techniques to get his shot off not only quickly, but also in open space and open areas. One of those ways is he's got a very nice release already at this point that has general quickness to it and does pretty well against closeouts, which I think is already a huge plus here for New York, a team that has been dying for offense since hiring Tom Thibodeau. You get one of the better shooters in the class and someone who shot, by the way, around 50% on catch and shoot opportunities last year. Sounds like a really good fit next to Julius Randle and Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. And then you also look at the opportunity here for what he's going to be able to do when he gets closed out on very well, or if a guy closes out really hard and jumps past him. He's got the best escape dribble in the class. And what an escape dribble is when a guy flies by you, you're able to take a side step to the left or a side step to the right, create just enough space here where even if the guy tries to get back into play, you've basically given yourself enough space to still have an open jump shot. And he connects very well and very consistently off of those opportunities as well. He's a talented offensive player off the ball. And I think he's also going to be someone who a year or two or three from now grows into what he's going to become defensively. Right now, I think there's a little bit of a question mark there about what he is right now. But 2 or 3 years from now, I'm buying into the potential there on AJ Griffin. Pick 12, Oklahoma City Thunder here again. Now, remember, they went with Jabari Smith, second overall. And the first two picks here remain the same for OKC from the last mock draft. Mark Williams, way too good a value here for Oklahoma City to pass up on. He measured 7'2" with shoes on. That was the tallest in the class at the NBA Draft Combine. And then you also look at his standing reach, 9'9", and I can't emphasize that enough. Big players, that is important to have. The amount of times around the rim that other teams, other players are going to feel his size and say, wow, maybe I don't want to attack the rim anymore. I don't really want to get met by a 7'2" Mark Williams down by the rim and then get my shot blocked into the first row. Mark Williams is going to have a nice rim protection element to him. And by the way, he's really good at a lot of other things as well. He's smart defender out in space. He stays on his feet fairly well. And then you also look at his offensive game as someone who is going to function fairly well as a screener. He's going to be comfortable playing in his own game offensively. He's not going to want to take the big shot. He's not going to bring any drama offensively, which I think is important if your center can buy into the scheme and the system. And then you also look at his ability to catch lobs, which again, it doesn't sound like it's that hard for a guy who's 7'2", but the timing, the concentration to finish plays around contact, it is a tough thing. And Mark Williams does it better than almost anyone else in this class. I think Jalen Duren does have him beat a little bit in terms of finishing lobs through contact, but Mark Williams is right there as well. He's got, again, the length, the size, and everything you're looking for in today's modern center. I think Mark Williams can get the job done. 13, Charlotte Hornets here now. And for Charlotte, what could the Hornets really be considering? I'm going here with Jeremy Sochan out of Baylor. Given the coaching candidates that are really narrowed down here for Charlotte, you're looking at Terry Stotts, who was longtime Portland Trailblazers coach and theoretically never really built a good defense there in Portland. You look at Mike D'Antoni, who his defense has really fluctuated based on the defensive coordinator that was on his staff at the time. Again, I don't think Mike D'Antoni was really ever responsible for building a good defense. And then Kenny Atkinson, who I think is a smart coach, but I think at certain times Kenny Atkinson does lack certain things that you would be looking for in terms of building something. Now, he did a really great job with the Brooklyn Nets, but again, that's a very unique situation here, and I think completely different from what Charlotte's going to end up becoming. When I look at Charlotte, this team is brutal defensively. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think it all starts at the point of attack there. LaMelo Ball, he plays very upright defensively and very slim. Now, he's a great offensive player. He's one of the better players in the league because of his offensive skill set as a passer and actually as a scorer, which he's been much better at than I think a lot of people expected really early on in his career. And he's really breathed life into this Hornets franchise, right? I know I'm sounding really critical of Charlotte right now. It's because their aspirations, their goals are much higher than where they've gotten to right now, which is the play-in tourney. And I think a Jeremy Sochan selection can maybe even elevate you into a serious playoff team because of how good he is defensively, not only as a bigger guy who's able to protect the rim a little bit, he's going to clear out rebounds, and he's also going to be able to match up with bigs. He gives you some serious switchability. If you put him on a center and you want to go switch heavy defense, that is viable because he is able to stay in front of guards. And again, the length, size, and decent requisite athleticism are the things that Charlotte's going to fall in love with here if they do hold on to pick 13. Pick 14 now, the Cleveland Cavaliers on the board. And for me with Cleveland, I keep going back between a young approach and maybe a veteran type of approach here with the draft, where maybe 14, they look at a guy like Ochai Agbaji, who's maybe a little bit more ready to contribute right away. Or do they say, you know, we kind of got our guys and we feel like these players are going to be enough to carry us throughout regular seasons right now. Do we want to go with another boom option here that could maybe elevate what we could become? And 14th overall, we are going with the boom option. We're going with, out of the NBL, Ousmane Dieng from the New Zealand Breakers. And I absolutely love this kid's game. I think he's everything that everyone hoped Killian Hayes would become. He's got phenomenal size for the position, around 6'8", can play point guard off the bench, but he's also capable to play the small forward position because of his defensive capabilities as well. He's competitive on that end of the floor. He's got a pretty good nose for the basketball. And I think he's able to, clear out rebounds at a pretty good level as well. Not that Cleveland really needs it with Mobley and Allen in there, but it gives them another option, another ball handler, which I do think is important there in Cleveland, specifically as someone who's going to be really great in drive and kick scenarios as a bigger style guard who's able to make the right reads at the right times. I think this is what really Cleveland was missing this past year, and I'm not certain that Colin Sexton's re-arrival fixes this issue, and I'm not sure that Karis LeVert was ever going to fix this issue. I still think that Cleveland needs to find a little bit more shooting. There are some other options on the board that would have made sense in that regard, a guy like Ochai Agbaji, but here, if everything goes right with Ousmane Dieng, if he booms, Cleveland is going to be terrifying down the road. 15, Charlotte on the board again. And don't worry, Kansas fans, Ochai Agbaji's not fallen far. He goes to the Charlotte Hornets here at this spot. And I know right now it sounds like the Hornets have a plethora of forwards with Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, and the like with Kelly Oubre. They've also got Martin there. But ultimately here for me with Charlotte, Hayward's on the trade block. I really believe that they're going to look for trade partners for him. Then you also look at Miles Bridges, who is a free agent. Now, I think he likely stays in Charlotte. But Ochai Agbaji can play sort of a 2. He can play kind of like a 3. And you do have flexibility here because he's a very good off-ball player in his own right. He's able to knock down open jump shots, whether that's off the move or in standstill scenarios. And for Ochai Agbaji, he's also a competitive defender. Now, I think at times this past year for Kansas, people overstated what he's capable of doing. But ultimately, at or around the middle of the first round, I think is a very appropriate range for Ochai Agbaji. Hornets fall into that here, 15th overall, and I think it is a pretty solid selection for a player who's withdrawn his name 2 times from the NBA draft. The 3rd time here is the charm for Ochai Agbaji going 15th overall. 16 now, the Atlanta Hawks here at this spot. And for Atlanta, they need to get better on the defensive side of the ball as well. Fairly similarly to the Charlotte Hornets, everything we talked about there, I think applies to Atlanta, except I think Trae Young is probably even worse defensively than LaMelo Ball. And I wouldn't even say probably, he just flat out is. So how do you try and counteract that? You find another forward who can bring some weak side rim protection, but is also decent in on-ball scenarios. And for me, that's EJ Liddell out of Ohio State, a player who has really stepped up his play. He's a junior, and you typically don't see juniors going 16th overall, but he is very well deserving of it based on his recent play and his actual progression. What we've seen from him since coming in as a freshman in Ohio State to where he's at now, it's a night and day difference. He's such a better player. I think all the Buckeyes fans would attest to that. And ultimately with Liddell here, he stays in that red and white because Atlanta would need that forward help. It's a little bit of an interesting situation there in Atlanta. They have DeAndre Hunter, John Collins. They've also got Onyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella right now. So their front court is kind of filled out. But again, they just need so much more defensive help that I think you try and play around it and just go best talent here that fits your needs. And for me, Liddell is that best talent that fits their needs. 17, Houston Rockets now at this spot. And the Houston Rockets, after going with Paolo Banchero in the top 3, they're going to come back and get even stronger, more athletic, and a lot more upside. And that's in Tari Eason here out of LSU, a player who I think right now his skills are not off the charts by any stretch. I think rather his skills are somewhat lacking, and that's why I'm a little bit more hesitant of him as a prospect myself on my big boards, but I am starting to come around a little bit more and more each and every video on my analysis of him as an athlete and someone who I think could actually really have an impact in meaningful NBA games, especially come playoff time, which that's the goal here in Houston. Now, maybe the Rockets are a couple years away from that, but Tari Eason's a couple years away from being a good NBA player in his own right. So the goal here with Tari Eason, you focus some real skill development with him, get him more hours in the gym working on his game, and then some of that athletic components like we see with how strong he is, his big size, length, physicality, his ability to rebound the basketball, his ability to defend, I think really does complement what Houston's looking for defensively. And then also maybe he can have a nice offensive impact as well. Not every player comes into the NBA really ready to contribute. I think Tari Eason probably falls into that role a little bit, but ultimately there in Houston, he's going to get minutes to showcase what he can do. And I think it'll be really good for his career to showcase what he is. 18, the Chicago Bulls here now. And last week I really loved what I mocked, so I actually kept it straight here going forward. And that's Walker Kessler. I considered it for Houston 17th overall, but landed on Kessler here at 18 for Chicago. And I just think this is a huge need. I watched Chicago live in person this year, and it was a very good experience. But I think one of the big things I noticed was their backup center play is just horrendous. You know, I noticed that on NBA League Pass as well, watching games. I watch so many games every single year of every single team. In Chicago, their front court play obviously was hindered because Patrick Williams missed so much time, but just quite frankly, the backup center position was abysmal. Tony Bradley, that's not going to get the job done. And then you also look at Tristan Thompson, who they brought in near the end of the season. Again, not going to get the job done there. I don't think Tristan Thompson is anything that should deter you from taking a center 18th overall. And yes, they have Vucevic. He's also aging himself. To be honest, if I were a Bulls fan, I would be really irate about the Nikola Vucevic trade. you can maybe look at it with the caveat that says maybe we don't get DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo and Caruso if we don't make that deal. And that could be true. And if that's the case, then, then the deal's probably worth it. But ultimately, for me, I think Walker Kessler, a really good shot to become a long-term key factor for Chicago, whether that's off the bench or, 3-4 years from now, starting for the Bulls at the center spot. Number 19, Minnesota Timberwolves here now. And for me with the Wolves, there's a lot of things to consider. They're probably really sad Walker Kessler's off the board, and they would maybe be a team to watch for trading up above pick 18. In this mock, I did not include trade downs, but that is a potential outcome where they want to jump if Walker Kessler is still available, put him next to Cat, give you some more length and size on the floor. But for Minnesota here, with him off the board, I don't really love any of the other center options. Just at pick 19, I think it's a little too rich here to pass on some of the other players for a center at this spot. I think that they go with the next best thing they can do, and that's find a talented guard, and that's Jaden Hardy for me out of G League Ignite. I really like this kid's game. Again, I think everyone is sleeping on Jaden Hardy. Not only his ability to score the basketball, but I think he's really grown a lot as a playmaker. Played fairly well as a playmaker this past year for G League Ignite. One issue he does have is he leaves his feet fairly frequently to pass the basketball, which he's going to run into some trouble with. He's going to turn over the ball at a pretty high rate early in his career. But if we're looking at long-term outlooks here, I think he could be one of the top 10 players from this class when it's all said and done, specifically because of his ability to put the ball on the deck. He's a good athlete, and he can score the basketball on all three levels. Now, he has to find a little bit more consistency. His efficiency was fairly low there, but he did shoot 88% from the free throw line. Some people really like to buy into those numbers. I tend to not as much, but overall as a shooter, when I look at his actual mechanics, I think that he's going to shoot the ball fairly decently at the NBA level down the road. Probably not his rookie or sophomore season, but maybe by year 3, we really start to see that improvement. And for Minnesota here, yes, they're hungry to make a playoff push, but at the same time, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, we're going to go with a long-term approach. And that's something Tim Connolly, their new president of basketball operations, has done a great job of when he was in Denver in that same title and same role. And now in Minnesota, I don't expect anything to change. I think he'll have Jaden Hardy's name circled. I've agreed with Tim Connolly a ton in the past. It's funny, Tim Connolly's drafts tend to look kind of what I would have done. Obviously, not quite the Nikola Jokic thing. I did not foresee that like Tim Connolly maybe did. But for me here, Jaden Hardy, I still think a really great grab, 19th overall. Pick 20, San Antonio here now at this spot. And for the Spurs, after going with Jalen Duren 9th overall, how do we come back and continue to build to this team? And we're going in a different route than most people would expect. And we're going with Malachi Branham, who is probably more of a 2 or 3, probably more of a 2 though, at the NBA level, coming out of Ohio State. And this might be surprising to Spurs fans. They're going to say, whoa, we don't need a 2. We drafted Josh Primo last year. And yes, I sort of agree, but this is a different style 2 than Primo. Primo wins a lot with athleticism, his off-ball movement. Malachi Branham is just flat out a good shooter. He's able to play with his back to the basket as a 2. He's got really good length for the position, which I think San Antonio would really value. And then you also look at his ability on both ends of the floor to just impact the game. He really stepped up toward the end of the season when EJ Liddell needed a little bit more assistance there for the Buckeyes. And I think he's someone who, as a young player, can actually impact winning fairly quickly. In San Antonio, Jalen Duren may be a player who doesn't impact winning as much right away. I think Malachi Branham can have an impact there. Lonnie Walker is also headed toward free agency, so you're looking at a void of minutes. Could Malachi Branham play 15 to 20 minutes a game his rookie season? I definitely think so, and I think the Spurs here get better selecting him. 21, Denver Nuggets here now, and we're going to keep it complicated. We're going Nikola Jovic from Serbia, so we're getting another international player here named Nikola, and it's a very similar last name as well. Not Jokic, but Jovic here. And I think, again, when you look at Denver, I do have my concerns about if there's a brain drain going on for the Nuggets, specifically when you consider the fact that they've lost a lot of their executives. When you look at Karnisovas, who's now with the Chicago Bulls, you look at Tim Conley, who's with the Minnesota Timberwolves now. Denver has lost some of their top decision makers. So does it impact their ability to draft? I hope not. I hope that at least with the point of where they were when Conley headed toward Minnesota, that they've circled already some guys that they would like to add to this team. and Nikola Jovic should be on that short list because of his ability to shoot the basketball. He's able to put the ball on the deck. Yes, he does have some defensive deficiencies. We've seen Mike Malone work around that in the past, though. And I think ultimately here, he probably slots in as a 3 or 4 most often in the NBA level. He's got good size again at 6'10". And Denver, the goal here is to add a little bit more forward depth to your bench unit, specifically when Michael Porter Jr. is healthy. 22, Memphis Grizzlies here now. And while we're on the topic of great executives, shout out to Zach Kleiman, who won Executive of the Year this past year at only 33 years old. So hopefully in the next 11 years, I have one of those awards as well. We'll see if I ever get there. But 22nd, I have the Memphis Grizzlies taking a really good player in Ron Harper Jr. And I think this kind of fits Zach Kleiman's recent draft history. You look at the Desmond Bane selection a couple drafts ago in the 2020 class. They took him 30th overall. He was a fourth year senior out of TCU, on a player who was just flat out good. Played hard defensively, fairly good athlete, and also someone who knocked down the 3 ball at an extremely high clip. And for me, with Ron Harper Jr. here, he maybe doesn't shoot the 3 ball as well, but that's not what Memphis is missing here. Memphis is missing a physical wing who can still knock the 3-point shot down and play around their big guys. I think one key issue for Memphis when we got into the postseason, the Kyle Anderson and Brandon Clark minutes had to be completely separated. The two of them could just not fit together based on the lack of shooting with those two on the floor. Ron Harper Jr. is not a weak shooter like Kyle Anderson, and he's a much better defender than Kyle Anderson, even though Anderson, of course, great IQ. He's got pretty good hands. Ron Harper Jr. is one of the better defensive players in this class, and he wins with footwork. I think he's going to translate really well to the NBA. This is kind of like my Herb Jones, Jalen Brunson of this class. I think he's going to be a massive steal for whatever team gets him. 22 to me is too low. I have him top 20 in my board, and every single time I watch him, he keeps moving up and up and up because I'm not so much worried about the potential because he's just flat out a really good basketball player right now, the day we speak. We do have an NBA Draft Sleepers video on the channel as well. I highly recommend watching that after this video. It also goes in depth on some second round players that I think could be some pretty good steals. 23, Brooklyn Nets here now. And for Brooklyn, a team that is dying for a little bit more wing length and help. We saw Boston absolutely walk the floor with them. I know those games were technically close. It was still a sweep. Brooklyn got played off the floor. The hope is you come back next year with way more length, better defensive acumen, and not only adding Ben Simmons into that, but now you find a way to add Kendall Brown here as well. It is worth noting that Brooklyn could defer this selection to next year, which means this would be Philly's pick. But I think that with Kendall Brown here, like, I'm going to mock for Brooklyn simply because I think, the fact that they own the rights to this pick makes it more intriguing to mock for them. And really, Philly only gets to have this pick if Brooklyn decides they want next year's instead. But Kendall Brown, a good option here for Brooklyn, someone who offensively needs to grow quite a bit with his ability to knock down 3-point shots. He's a very hesitant shooter who shoots a low volume and not a high percentage, which is not a great combination coming in, but he does a lot of the other things right. He's kind of like a bigger Derek White in a lot of ways, which is kind of a funny comparison because we've seen the impact that Derek White had for Boston and his ability to guard guards. I think Kendall Brown maybe will have that type of impact, but in terms of guarding forwards, providing more length and athleticism, and he's good in the open floor as well. So you find a combination of Simmons, Kendall Brown to complement Kyrie, Kevin Durant, and we'll see what happens with that center position, or if they try and play, maybe a Seth Curry still on the floor. That's a potential outcome as well, where you have Brown, Simmons, and also Kevin Durant kind of as your hybrid front court with a lot of length and size and athleticism. 24, Milwaukee here now on the Bucks. They're going to take advantage of a really good player slipping a little bit here, and that's Ty Washington. He's been one of the latest fallers of the NBA draft simply because he doesn't have great prototypical size. He's kind of the normal, size point guard in the NBA, and he doesn't really outshine the other prototypical guards in that regard. He's also not the most willing 3-point shooter. He's not a bad 3-point shooter. He's not super hesitant like Kendall Brown, but he prefers working in the mid-range area, which isn't the sexiest thing when it comes to draft evaluation. But I think he kind of adds all the things that Milwaukee's missing a little bit here. And when Milwaukee lost Chris Middleton, it did really kill their offense because they don't really have another consistent pick and roll ball handler. Drew Holiday can do it. He just doesn't do it as frequently, and he's not as skilled as a guy like Chris Middleton in the pick and roll game. And Ty Washington exclusively was the best pick and roll guard this past year for Kentucky. And I think he's a really important player that Milwaukee could add at this spot. If they feel like they have to, I would actually recommend for them to move up a little bit in the draft to try and get him if they can find a way to swing that, because he could have a really nice impact again for this team simply with his ability to work in the pick and roll off the bench. Again, he's way better than George Hill. I think he'll be better than Luca Vildoza, who I think was a pretty decent signing for them out of Argentina. But here, Ty Washington, really great value for Milwaukee, a player that I think probably should go in the top 20, but if he slides down to 24 based on some of the concerns, really good pickup. 25, San Antonio now at this spot. The Spurs here, after going already in this draft with Duren and Malachi Branham, they come back and find Jalen Williams here out of Santa Clara, someone who keeps rising up the board a little bit, and he's probably a forward that we could label with guard skills, which is always an intriguing thing. He's not the prototypical 6'8" forward, though. He's about the 6'6" variety, so he's going to play a lot of small forward at the NBA level. And again, for San Antonio, that's not a huge need. They do have some good forwards there already in guys like Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, who's kind of a hybrid guard forward, but he's got good forward size to him. Jalen Williams isn't a need, but at the same time, San Antonio here has 3 first-round picks, and they were a play-in team. There's not a ton of needs to really identify for this team with 3 selections, and I think we've already done a good job finding 2 of the needs with the first 2. So Jalen Williams, kind of a luxury pick here, but again, a talented player with decent size. Those tend to usually go in the first round. I think Jalen Williams definitely worthy of that selection. 26th, my Dallas Mavericks here now. If you guys are a fan of the Dallas Mavericks, make sure to leave a like on today's video and also subscribe to the channel, because I myself am a Mavs fan. Mavs fans got to stick together, right? So now 26 here, I have the Mavs going with Ismail Kamagate, who I think is gaining a lot of traction in Mavs circles, specifically Mavs fans. But I'm not mocking him here because of how fans feel about him. I'm mocking him here because I think there's no way that Nico Harrison can go into this offseason without a plan to address the center position, and grabbing one of the best overseas big men in a player like Kamagate here, it is just a massive must. Specifically, and this is why I really, did not love the Kristaps Porzingis trade. And yes, the end result worked out pretty well for Dallas, just given the fact they made it to the Western Conference Finals this year, even though Davis Bertans was one of the worst defensive players in the entire playoffs, and Spencer Dinwiddie really didn't shoot the ball that well actually from the field in the postseason. For me, trading Kristaps Porzingis, they lost all of their rim protection. We saw it against Golden State. They just had no way of protecting the rim. And despite a really good team defense concept, I think Porzingis' absence was noticed as a weak side rim protector. Ismail Kamagate is going to clean a lot of that up. He's a very nice rim protector. He stays vertical, challenges at the rim fairly well, and I think someone who could have an impact as early as next season for Dallas. 27, Miami Heat here now, and this just feels like a Miami Heat type of player here in Trevor Keels, does it not? Keels only measured in about 6'4" at the combine, which definitely hurt his stock in my eyes, but his decision to not participate in 5-on-5 scrimmages makes me believe that his agent feels really confident in his odds getting drafted in the first round. And I still see Miami here considering Keels simply because, again, he fits their culture, he fits their mold, he's big, strong, he's gonna be able to guard multiple positions, he moves his feet well, and he plays within himself, and offensively he can drive the basketball well, get into the chest of shot blockers and still finish around the rim, and he'll knock down open jump shots. Now, maybe not at the highest clip, he's not going to be the most reliable three-point shooter, but he'll knock them down with some sort of regularity to the point where you have to at least respect him as a shooter to a certain degree. And I think for Miami, that's all you really need. They were this close to making the NBA Finals. Slight improvements here and there on their roster could be enough to really bolster them into a playoff team that could really look to make some big noise again next postseason. 28, the Golden State Warriors here now. And again, what an incredible run from the Warriors back to the NBA Finals. And even though I'm a Mavs fan, you would maybe think I'm salty. I'm not. The Warriors are just an awesomely ran organization that deserve a ton of credit. Joe Lacob, Bob Myers, everyone there in charge making decisions for Golden State, they all deserve pay raises. They all deserve a ton of credit, because the fact that this team is back to where they are after, what looked like 2 disastrous seasons is incredible. And the funny thing is, I really did believe in this team. Even go back to this past offseason, I had a video up on the channel about why the Lakers wouldn't make the playoffs. And a lot of people were saying, well, it's a weak West. I warned everyone, watch out for the Warriors. I wish I kind of rode with my heart a little bit more on them because I would have been a little bit more vocal about it. But everything played out really well for Golden State. The Andrew Wiggins trade looks genius. And here at this spot, this is like a can't lose scenario here. I'm going to have him go with Kennedy Chandler, a player who maybe he'll fall as well for some of the same reasons Ty Washington did, but to a greater extent because he is quite a bit smaller, only about 6 feet tall. He does have a really good wingspan to make up for it, about 6'5.5", which is a 5.5-inch differential, which was one of the bigger ones in the entire draft class at the NBA Draft Combine. But again, when you're only 6 feet tall, that differential does look a little less intriguing. But when you look at Golden State, when you really consider one thing that maybe they are lacking, it is someone who can guard point guards, especially really quick point guards. And I think when you look at the Western Conference right now, Golden State, they got pushed pretty hard by the Memphis Grizzlies with Ja Morant going down. A Kennedy Chandler selection here is actually aimed at Ja Morant because you need to find a way to stay in front of Ja. And why not get one of the quickest players in the class, who, by the way, is a very smart defender. He's kind of like a Drew Holiday. Now, I don't think he's going to be as good offensively. And I think defensively, it's really hard to get to Drew Holiday level. Drew Holiday is one of the best, if not the best, perimeter defender in the league. But if he can even have an impact somewhat similar to Drew Holiday, this is a massive steal for Golden State. This is an example of the rich get richer. Sure, he's maybe not the highest upside guy, but you look at the long-term approach here, he fits next to a Moses Moody. He fits next to a Jordan Poole. He fits next to a Jonathan Kuminga. He fits next to a James Wiseman. Oh, and by the way, you look at the current team. He fits next to Klay Thompson. He fits next to Steph Curry. He fits next to Draymond Green. He's a smart basketball player, had a lot of success playing for the USA U19 World Cup team that won gold, and also had quite a bit of success this past year for Tennessee, being the best player on their roster. So for me, Kennedy Chandler, a pretty nice pickup here at 28. If he goes in the second round, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think Golden State, a smart enough organization to make the right move here. Pick 29, Memphis again on the board. And after finding a really good player at 22 and a player I really like there in Ron Harper Jr., they're going to do it again. And I'm going to buy into Zach Kleiman and his ability to make decisions and draft Hugo Bassan, who I think is a massive steal again here. He is in that sleepers video I talked about. And for me, I've been ringing the bell all year, trying to wake everyone up on this kid. He played great in the combine, and I still don't think he's getting enough attention, enough exposure that he really deserves. He was one of the better players in the entire NBL this past year, given his age. For players who are 25 and under over there, he had very high impact. He's got combo guard skills, which is perfect here because Tyus Jones is headed toward free agency. You need to find a way to add to that bench point guard spot. I think that Bassan can play into that role, but I also think if you want to play him next to Ja Morant, which at certain times I think would be a really fun, intriguing lineup, you definitely can do that. And by the way, Memphis has enough size and length behind Bassan where some of his defensive limitations do not become problematic because Jaren Jackson pretty much blocks everything in sight or fouls the guy. Brandon Clark, a really great defender as well in certain situations and roles. So I think Hugo Bassan, offensive upside here for Memphis. The idea here is to go punch for punch with Golden State and maybe take them down next season. And then the final pick of the first round here, Oklahoma City Thunder. And we're looking back to a player I haven't mocked in the first round for quite some time, but I wouldn't be completely shocked if Oklahoma City did pull the trigger here on Max Christie out of Michigan State. And some of you who have been watching the mocks more recently might say, who? And Max Christie at 6'5", he's got pretty solid size for the two guard spot. And he's got a nice long wingspan. And for Oklahoma City, he's a freshman coming out of Michigan State. He kind of fits the bill in terms of a young, dynamic prospect with great length, pretty good size. And yes, it's a guard. Oklahoma City doesn't necessarily need a guard, but it never hurts to add just a flat out good player. They've already gone forward and center at this point of the first round. And Max Christie does a lot of the work off the basketball. He's actually really good on some curl cuts. He's also very capable of making quick moves once he catches the ball, one dribble max type of guy, where he has more upside to, put the ball in the hole a little bit more, put the ball in the deck a little bit more, excuse me. But also when he has the ball only for 1, 2, 3 seconds of possession, he can get stuff done. I think he's actually a really nice fit next to Shea and next to Josh Giddey and even next to Trey Mann. I think he's a pretty reliable player, honestly. They have a plethora of guards already, but Max Christie would not be a bad addition here. I wouldn't be surprised if they try and trade this pick either, maybe out to the future. But Oklahoma City here at this spot, Max Christie, definitely a solid selection. And again, just a huge thank you to you guys for watching today's entire video. If you did watch today's entire video, comment utility sports down in the comment section. I would love to know that you guys watched the entire thing. So if you got to this point, comment utility sports. The other people aren't going to know what's going on, which will be awesome. Like, subscribe, and also follow our socials. Again, hit that subscribe button. That's really the biggest thing. And also leaving a like on the video. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here with the NBA draft content. Again, I'm really grinding here. I've been working over 50 hours a week at 2 different jobs, plus doing the YouTube stuff here. So a lot of work's going in. Basically feels like I have no free time right now, but luckily I love recording these videos so much that it's well worth my free time because it is something I really am passionate about and love to do. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.